So if I can get a motion to call a meeting to order. Okay, Corey motions. Derek seconds. All in favor?
Hey.
So I've got a little bit of business. We don't have a lot this evening. There's been no change in the treasury report. So there's been no change in the OSBA affiliation due to the weather. Craig and Bruce were not able to get together. So there's been no change in that affiliation currently. They're hoping to get together here in the next few weeks, I believe. Standing business, approval of last meeting minutes.
You want me to go over those, or are we just going to approve them?
Yeah, we need to go over them, but I need you to be able to. Can you come up here and so you can be on the microphone? Yeah. Okay. I'll bring them up here on the computer, so you can just read them off. Hope you brought your spectacles.
Yeah.
Okay, so Corey, with the minutes.
Okay, minutes from regular meeting on February the 8th.
Let me do this. Let me share the screen so everybody can read them too.
Okay.
Share screen. Okay, now everybody can see them.
Okay. We discussed the OSBA affiliation. No motions needed. We went over the 2021 officer election results. There was 100% for Corey Ruby as secretary and Derek Gibson as vice president. No motions needed. Auditing committee, Craig Ellis volunteered. Motion made by Corey Ruby and Bruce Rand. Carried. We approved the minutes of the December meeting. Craig Ellis motion, Gene Elliott second. Carried. Treasurer's report was discussed. Motion by Corey Ruby, second by Craig Ellis. Carried. And the new business of last time was the Youth Hive program. Coordinator, we need a coordinator. Gene Elliott expressed interest. And to discuss that tonight, meeting was called to order at 6:37 p.m. Derek Gibson made the motion, Corey Ruby second. Oh, excuse me, that's called to order, my bad. I did not put that at the top, and I did that tonight, so I will not make that mistake next time. Meeting adjourned at 6:54. Derek Gibson made the motion, Randy second, and the motion carried.
Okay, thanks, Corey. Okay, any questions over the minutes? Jim makes a motion to approve.
It's Craig. I make a motion to approve.
Okay, Craig is second. So we got Jim Blevins motion to approve, Craig Ellis motion to second. All in favor? Aye. Okay. Opposed? Now I got to get back to where I was. Okay. Treasurer's report. There's been no change in the treasurer's report. I talked to Bruce today. I've got a bunch of registrations for beekeepers here that I need to get to the bank with. I just haven't had time to get with Bruce and get a deposit slip and get to the bank. And then a couple of items of new business I don't have on here. One of them is the Youth Hive program. I checked with the extension office, and I believe that they said that 4-H projects had to be selected by March 15th, which puts us too late really to get information out there this year for the Youth Hive program. So I kind of made some notes that we're going to start on the Youth Hive program in November of next year, Gene. That way we can have stuff ready to go out January 1st when the clubs start meeting. So we're just going to kind of put that off this year because we're kind of behind the deadline on that. If we put the information out now, that only gives them 2 weeks to decide if they want to even do the beekeeping project. And most of the kids have already selected their projects for this year. So I can get a list from the. Yeah.
I was wondering if we get a list of that, then next fall, when they start having the meetings, bringing the meetings up, that we can maybe go and give a little talk.
Okay.
And, but I gotta find out the requirements though, of what beekeeping, do they have to have a hive with bees in it?
Yes, they have to have either a hive with bees in it or access to a hive with bees to be able to participate in the project. The best thing to do would be to call down there and see when they're going to be in and go down, and they'll let you look at the project book. That's what I did last year. I went down and looked at the project book, and they can show you exactly what all they're going to be judged on and what kind of information they're required to present as part of their program. No, I'm not judging that. I've never been asked to judge that, actually. So
I want to clarify, so we're not going to do it.
We've missed the deadlines for this year with everything going on, so I've kind of put a thing up on my calendar to start in November for 2022. Anybody have any questions over that? I know that's kind of a big change, but that was kind of my fault. The deadline kind of snuck up on me. We kind of rushed it together last year, so I think if we start in November of this year, we won't have quite a rush. What? To select your projects used to be mid-April, but a couple years ago it got moved up to mid-March. So it's March 15th is when they have to turn their projects in. And that's because a lot of the judging went away from the fair. When all the judging was at the fair in August, they had more time to select their projects. But now that the judging is in June and July before the fair, they don't have as much time. They've got to select their projects beforehand. So. Okay. The only other thing that I've got, if you weren't aware, Corey Ruby's been selected for the Jackson County apiary inspector. Chris Lovett decided to step down from that position. So you've got 2 county inspectors in your club now. You've got myself as Gallia County, and you've got Corey as Jackson County. So Corey's going to be getting trained up, and you'll be seeing him out. If you're in the Jackson County area, you'll be seeing him out inspecting your hives. So that's all the business that I have. Anybody else have any other business? Bruce or Craig?
No, I'm good. I had a fall too. That's one of the reasons I can't get together with them, and it fell on the ice out here at the farm. So.
Okay. That seems to be a theme. I've had several. I'm working overtime because somebody fell at work. So.
Yeah. Congratulations, Corey.
It's no fun.
Okay, so if that's all we've got, if I can get a motion to close the business portion of the meeting.
It's Craig on motion.
Gene motions. Who motioned online? I think
Craig
motioned.
I'll second it.
Okay. Yeah. So all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. I'm going to get my screen sharing going here, and I'll get the presentation up. Oh, come on, computer. Okay. So I think I can. There it is. Okay. Everybody see that okay? Online?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay. So I had a presentation in mind and had most of it put together. And then Thursday and Friday, some major news came out in the beekeeping world. I don't know if any of you guys have seen this or not, So we're going to talk quite a bit about some of the latest things that have just happened with beekeeping in the last few days, and just kind of give some clarification because there's a lot of confusion out there. Come on. Okay, so February 23rd, 2021, the EPA released updated rules concerning the use of oxalic acid in beehives. Previously, the EPA had a requirement of a tolerance of oxalic acid in honey. This tolerance was removed. And this is what is creating a lot of confusion because the EPA was not very clear on what they decided on this and why they decided it. We know why they decided it, but they weren't really clear what this means for us because the new labels for oxalic acid for use in a beehive are not out yet. So this tolerance previously that was in use with oxalic acid prevented oxalic acid from being used with honey supers on a hive. Now, under the new guidance that was issued on Thursday, you can treat with oxalic acid with honey supers on. So this is a big change. The last 15 years that we've been allowed to use oxalic acid in our beehives, you were not allowed to use them with supers on. This does not allow for any new types of approved ways of using oxalic acid. This is only has to do with the current ways that we're using oxalic acid. There's no new treatment means that have been approved. So just to review oxalic acid, there are only two approved EPA methods to treat with oxalic acid, and those are dribble and vaporization. There is speculation in the near future other uses of oxalic acid in beehives may be approved. And there's some misinformation out there on the internet. I've seen several people post that because of this change, it allows you to use oxalic acid any way that you want, and this does not. The EPA regulates the use of oxalic acid in beehives because it is being used as a pesticide. And just like we want the guys that are spraying their crops and their fields and homeowners that are spraying, we want them regulated. We need to use it within the confines of the law, because if we want to complain about other people using pesticides outside of the confines of the way that they're labeled to be used, then we shouldn't be using pesticides outside of the way they're labeled for us to use them. So by law, you still have to use oxalic acid that has been labeled for use in a beehive. This means by law, you can't go to Home Depot or Thomas Do It Center or Amazon and buy the oxalic wood bleach. Yes, sir.
Can I say something about that wood bleach just for a second? There is a special oxalic acid for bees.
Mm-hmm.
It's made by a pharmaceutical.
Mm-hmm.
It is called Apibioxol.
Yes.
That is as far as I know, one of the few approved solid OA treatments.
Yes.
I highly encourage people to use
So for those online, if you couldn't hear Corey, what he was saying was there's only one USDA approved oxalic acid. It's called Apibioxol, and it is the only one that is guaranteed purity. The stuff that you buy at the hardware store, while it may work, may contain some heavy metals in it that you may not be aware of. And that's why the EPA wants you to use something that's a pharmaceutical grade that's been approved and appropriately labeled for use in your beehive. So that's one of the big things of confusion out there, is because they said that they removed the tolerance. A lot of people think that you can just go get any type of oxalic acid out there and use it. And like I said, technically oxalic acid by the law that you use in your beehive is supposed to be labeled as such. Just a review of oxalic acid. It's a naturally occurring organic acid. It's the same reason you can't eat the leaves of a rhubarb plant, because they contain a lot of oxalic acid. It is naturally occurring. The bees can tolerate this, but it does kill phoretic mites only. The phoretic mites are the ones that are not in the brood. They're the ones that are on the backs of the bees and walking around in the beehive. So one thing to remember with oxalic acid is it's a very, very concentrated form, and it can be harmful to your health. So use proper PPE and read and understand the risks to your health before using. If you're using this, I recommend, if you're using the crystals to make the dribble, that you use gloves, that you wear gloves whenever you're handling it. And then if you're going to do the vaporization, you really, really need to wear a respirator because this stuff is really, really dangerous for your lungs. A good respirator. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, make sure it says that it's for volatile organic compounds. Craig, why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Let me make sure you're unmuted here. Are you there, Craig?
Yeah, I'm here.
You're kind of our chemical guy, so if you
Yeah,
maybe
they make a cartridge for half-face respirators that's rated for organic compounds and acid gases. So you need to have both those ratings on it to be able to protect yourself. Just the organic one by itself or the acid gas would probably be okay, but I would get one with both. In fact, Tractor Supply up there sometimes carries the ones that are rated for it. Not plugging Tractor Supply, but anyway.
yeah. And the other thing is eye protection because this will burn your eyes. So make sure you have eye protection when you use this. But the biggest thing is protect your lungs. And like Corey said, this is known to cause huge kidney issues. So if you inhale it or get it into your system, so
yeah, I'd probably wear goggles myself because that's in the concentrations it's in and everything else. It's really rough stuff. I've handled it over the years in the chemical industry.
Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you're going to use oxalic acid, just make sure any of these treatments, all of these are chemical treatments that are in very high strength where you're using the Formic Pro. Yeah, you need nitrile gloves, Formic Pro, Apivar, Apistan, Kumafos, any of these you need to be wearing the appropriate PPE. There's a lot of videos out on YouTube that show guys doing these vaporizations and stuff like that, and they're not wearing anything, and it just makes me shake my head. Yeah.
Yeah, well, formic acid will eat your lunch on your skin really fast too.
Yeah. So the treatment that's coming up a lot is the EPA has approved it. Is the paper towel treatment. If anybody follows Randy Oliver on his scientific beekeeping, he talks a lot about the paper towel treatment where he uses vegetable glycerin, oxalic acid, and water and soaks the paper towels. He's got the formulas right there on his website. This has not been approved in the U.S. If you treat your hives with an oxalic acid paper towel treatment and myself or Corey would show up, we have to note that that is a violation because it's an off-label use. The reason that he's working on getting that treatment approved and he thinks that he's very close from the stuff I've read from him in the last couple of days is it's a long-term treatment. So as long as that paper towel is in there, that oxalic acid is working until the bees chew that paper towel out and carry it out. So it is a longer-term treatment. So instead of treating once a week for 3 weeks, you would do the paper towel treatment and you would be done. But again, this is the paper towel treatment is not been officially approved. He hopes to have that approved by this summer is the information that I've read from him in the last few days on some of the beekeeping forums, that the EPA thinks that they'll be able to approve that in some form, hopefully by mid to late summer. So hopefully this will open that up to something like that being available. So yes. Just do Randy Oliver or scientific beekeeping. And if you do Randy Oliver, you'll find his website and he's not technically a scientist, but he's heavily vested in the bee research field and he does a lot of testing and trials and submits a lot of data to the USDA and to the EPA for treatments. Okay, so the other big news, USDA's Beltsville Bee Lab just released a research paper on how nosema affects honeybees. And this is pretty exciting because they think that they might be able to get a better treatment for nosema infections in the bees from this. So what they found was nosema affects the ability of the bees to uptake iron from their diet. If you know anything about the way any kind of biology works, iron is a very important element to the way cell biology works. And without enough iron, it greatly inhibits the way that cells work. So nosema interferes with transferrin, which is a protein that makes the iron available to the bees from their gut. They get iron from the pollen that they bring in, and then this transferrin actually is able to absorb the iron and then put it into a form that the bees are able to use. So they've discovered that nosema scavenges this iron from the transferrin. So basically, nosema is stealing the iron from the bees, and this causes the bees to become weak and their immune system to become weak. So this is kind of hot off the press. This is not a treatment or anything. So what does this mean? Right now, I see very, very few nosema infections in our area. I've had hives for several years now. I've had a couple hives with dysentery, but when I've actually dug in and diagnosed it, I did not find a nosema infection in my bees. So right now, this study offers no treatment suggestions, no new treatment suggestions. Fumagillin is still the recommended treatment, but it opens a pathway for research of possible treatments. What you're likely going to see in the next year or two is you're going to see iron supplements added to or recommended with pollen substitutes in the short term. I foresee in the pollen substitute market that since they know that nosema affects the iron in the bees, that the pollen substitute manufacturers are going to start adding additional iron to make that iron available to the bees.
And your fumagillin was only available to a veterinarian last year. They had it off the shelf for some reason. Now we're able to carry that again.
Yeah.
So that was a big deal last year. I had some people call, couldn't get it.
Yeah, fumagillin was never. I don't know why they put it behind the counter, because does not require a veterinary feed directive. Only antibiotics require a veterinary feed directive. But there was some confusion with without getting a prescription from a veterinarian, you could not get fumagillin last year. But that should not have been the case, and it's back out and available. So just to review, nosema causes dysentery in your bees. It causes poor digestion and causes your bees to have diarrhea. And the only way that you can truly diagnose nosema is with a dissection and looking for the nosema spores. I've got the microscopes and stuff to do this. So if you think that you have a nosema infection, give me a call. We'll grab some bees. It does require killing the bees because we have to crush them up to get their gut material out. And then we'll look for nosema spores. I've got the dyes and stuff like that to be able to find the nosema spores. Dysentery is a possible sign of nosema infection. It is not a diagnosis. Just because your bees have dysentery doesn't mean that they necessarily have a nosema infection. If you've never seen dysentery, the front of this hive has a bunch of dysentery. That's a bunch of bee diarrhea on the front of the hives. Remember, your bees fly away from the hive to go to the bathroom. They very rarely will ever go to the bathroom inside of the hive or on the front or around the hive. So if you see a bunch of what looks like, I don't know, brown stains everywhere, that could be an indication of nosema. But dysentery is caused by a host of different reasons. They could have gotten into something that didn't agree with them. They could have got into some moldy or bad sugar syrup or something along those lines. So there's a lot of different things that can cause dysentery. The other picture is a 400 power microscope picture of Nosema apis versus Nosema cerana. Both of these are the two different types of nosema that our bees can get. And these are the spores from the fungus. It's a fungus, isn't it? Yes. So these are actually the spores are what we are looking for. So we dye those with we take the sample, we dye it with a specific dye that makes these stand out. And then I've got a microscope slide and we can actually do counts to tell how many thousands or millions of nosema spores are available per bee. So if you think you have a nosema infection, if you see a bunch of dysentery on your hives, let me know. I'll come out, I'll take a sample of bees and we'll take a look at it and see if you've got nosema. I've had several hives that I've seen dysentery on, and I've never been able to diagnose a significant nosema infection. So any questions over nosema? Do you know how you use fumagillin? I've never used it.
It comes in it's a powder,
Mm-hmm.
and there's very specific ways you can blend it into sugar syrup.
Okay.
And you feed it through
Okay.
through sugar syrup.
Okay. So Corey's saying that the fumagillin is fed through sugar syrup to your bees.
We keep it in stock if someone grabs
Okay. And Corey has fumagillin in stock in Oak Hill and at his location. So if you think you have an infection, get a hold of myself or Corey. We can work towards getting you a diagnosis. The thing of it is nosema, a lot of times once we get good weather and a lot of good feed coming in, will resolve on its own. It usually works itself out within a few weeks of the nectar flow really getting going. So it's usually very, very short-lived. So. Okay, so that's the beekeeping news. Does anybody have any beekeeping news that I'm not aware of that they've seen? I know there was some stuff out about the tropolaelaps, but it kind of was talking about that they've discovered there's 4 different types of tropolaelaps mites. So not only do we have varroa to worry about, now we've got 4 kinds of tropolaelaps mites that could potentially be working their way here, but only 2 of them have been found on honeybees so far. So. To the best of my knowledge on the killer hornets, the giant Asian hornet, they found the nest in the fall out in Washington State, and they think that they've gotten the nest. They're going to continue monitoring through the spring and see if they have any come to pheromone traps. And then they've gotten a little bit better. They found some better ways of tracking them back to their hives. So hopefully they'll be able to get that under control before it makes it too far. Hopefully it doesn't make it over here. So. Yeah. Have you seen the suits that they used when they eradicated that? They look like space suits. A little more than just a regular beekeeping suit. So if you saw my post the other day, I saw some pollen coming in. I saw 3 different colors. I saw a yellow, a red, and a white. I've seen a couple of maple trees that have a couple blooms on them, a couple silver maples, but it's just few and far between. I think that they're finding them, but I think we're still about a week away, maybe a week and a half from the silver maple bloom. It just depends on what the weather does over the next couple of days. As long as we don't have another cold snap, I think probably middle of March we'll see our first maple bloom. At least that's my hope. I'm ready to get this season going. I'm sure everybody else is too, but so hopefully that stuff should be showing up soon. So keep an eye on your bees. They should be out flying on warm days and see if they're bringing anything in. So typically we'll see the silver maples are one of our first bloomers, and then not too long after that, usually the crocuses will bloom about the same time. But usually that means swarm season is about 3 weeks away, 3 to 4 weeks away. From the very first maple trees blooming, yeah. We usually have a little bit of time because they still have to build up quite a bit. We're probably 4 to 5 weeks from swarming. So. Well, hang on. They're not around here. My dogwoods aren't even close. Okay, so if you're not familiar, this is the phenology calendar or the growing degrees day calendar. It currently says we're at day 0, and this is based off of soil temperatures, air temperatures, a bunch of different things go into this number. And our closest station is in Jackson County. So our data is kind of extrapolated from all these different stations all over. So we're at day 0, and the silver maples bloom at day 34. Is when they say that you see their first bloom. Like I said, I've seen a couple silver maple trees that do have some blooms that have popped open, but it's only a handful of blooms on a whole tree. And then you were asking about redbud. So if I go in here to the full calendar, I can go down here. Norway maples. I'm trying to find the redbud. It's on here somewhere. Do a search. Eastern redbud is day 191. So once this calendar starts, it goes very, very, very quickly. Like there might be several days where you go through 30, 40 days just based off of temperature and stuff that's happening. So Eastern redbud is day 191 on the growing degree day calendar. And you can actually, let's see. Go here. Let's see. I shared it last year. Here it is. Track the status of spring. So if you go, this is part of the USGS, the National Phenology Network. See if I can get this bigger here. And this is the spring leaf index of where trees are starting to leaf out. So if you look, most of Georgia is covered, and it's starting to get into the southern parts of Tennessee. This was as of, I think, March 1st. So as of March 1st, you're starting to see trees beginning to leaf out across southern North Carolina, southern Tennessee. And you can actually watch this map march. And it's kind of interesting. I always say it's kind of interesting to watch because it doesn't come up in a straight line. It'll actually come up through Tennessee and Kentucky towards our area and up the coast, and it'll kind of leave the mountains out a little bit. So you can actually kind of watch it if you watch these calendars and watch people swarm trapping and catching swarms and stuff like that. You can actually see it to start to march up both sides of the Appalachian Mountains and then end up up towards Ohio. So this is also a very good tool, and this is under the National Phenology Network, and it's called the Status of Spring. So if you can just Google Status of Spring, and it'll show you this map. Here's a little animated one, I think. Will it animate for me? Yeah. So you can see it starts in January and works its way up. And the different colors on this map show whether it's early or on time or late. So it actually looks like through the southern part of the country, it's actually a little bit early. And then it starts catching up. If you can see, it's actually a little late as it comes up through there. So I'd say we're probably right on time. So that's just some kind of interesting things that you can go look for. So speaking of swarm season, I always do a pretty good presentation on swarm trapping. Since I had that breaking news and that stuff that just came out, I'll just kind of abbreviate on this. I'll post some videos in the Facebook group and share them via email later this week. There's a couple guys that have put out some really good videos this spring on swarm trapping that I really like. And I'll share those with you here in a couple days. But I always talk about free ways to get your bees for free instead of spending money on your bees. I'll be the first to tell you I sell bees, but I get just as tickled when you tell me that you've caught a swarm in a swarm trap, or you got your first swarm call and you went out and hived a swarm and I know several people have called me up and said, hey, I've never hived a swarm. Can you go with me? And I'll go with you. And I know I went with Gene, and we put one in a box a while back. So, but swarm traps are a nice way that you can replace winter losses or get freebies or any kind of losses without spending a lot of money. The boxes can be used year after year. You can use old equipment, or you can make plywood boxes. The first year I did swarm trapping, I spent $100 on plywood, and I caught 7 swarms. So those 7 swarms easily paid for that $100 worth of plywood that I spent. There's a couple big things. There's a lot of plans out there for swarm traps. The biggest things and the biggest keys to swarm trapping are is that you need 35 to 40 liters of space. This is typically about the size of a deep box or 2 medium boxes. They don't want a huge opening. If the opening is too big, the bees could reject it. So you want 1.5 to 2 inch opening, and you want plenty of open space where the bees can fly around. If you look at the books that talk about how the bees make these decisions, like Tom Seeley's Honeybee Democracy, he actually observed the bees flying around inside of the box, measuring the space. And he actually had time studies and everything else that he did on this. So open space is important inside of these because the bees can't fly around. They think that there's not enough room in there for them to build comb. So a couple things that can help you with this. It helps to have old comb available. If you don't have old comb available, you can use lemongrass as a lure. I use a combination of 1 piece of comb on a frame and a lemongrass oil lure. I put my lemongrass on a paper towel, put it down in a Ziploc bag. I put 10 to 12 drops on a paper towel, put it down in a snack-sized bag. Those snack Ziploc bags have very, very thin plastic that allows the lemongrass oil to exit the bag, even when it's sealed, at a very, very slow rate, so you get a long life out of that. The thing to remember is too much lemongrass oil will repel the bees instead of attracting them. And you can put these on the ground or hang them in a tree. A lot of stuff says put them 10 to 15 foot in a tree. I did that the first year, and then I got tired of lugging a ladder around. And most of them are at chest or head height. And then I've got several of them that sit on the ground. So don't think that you have to hang these in a tree or hang these high up. I get them up off the ground, and then if they're in some place where there's livestock, I make sure they're up high enough that the livestock can't rub on them and knock them off the tree. I've tried the other product that's out there that a lot of people like is the Swarm Commander. I've tried the Swarm Commander. I had the same results with Swarm Commander versus lemongrass oil. I can get a big bottle of lemongrass oil on Amazon for like $10, $15, where a small 1 ounce bottle of Swarm Commander is $30. So the Swarm Commander is very, very expensive. I thought about ordering some, and I still might order some this year just to try it again and do some side-by-side comparisons. But I usually put out about 10 to 15 swarm traps, and I usually catch 7 or 8 swarms every year. It's like fishing. Once you figure out where you can put a swarm trap, you can catch bees there usually year after year after year. I've got several places I can put swarm traps. I can guarantee I'll catch bees. I might miss a year every now and then, but I can almost guarantee you every year that I'll catch bees. And it's just a great resource. Even if those bees that you catch in that swarm trap don't survive, they're going to build you comb. And remember, your comb is just as valuable resource as the bees, because that comb can be used to help out other hives. So even if you catch the swarm and they end up dying a couple months later, that comb is a pretty valuable resource. Here's a couple of my swarm traps. One of them I've got hanging in a tree. This is from my first year of beekeeping, the green one. It's probably about 8 foot up in a tree. Like I said, I don't do this anymore. Most of mine are either on the ground level or chest height. The one on the ground level, I try to sit them on something so that they're not sitting in the dirt or the mud. It typically, whatever I can find in a farmer's field or wherever I'm setting it. And that the one at ground level is just an old deep box that I wasn't using anymore. I repainted it. I screwed a plywood lid on it and screwed the bottom board to the hive and screwed an entrance reducer in it. These things work, and they work really well, and it's a good way to get bees. Any questions over swarm traps? So I know you've done swarm trapping, Gene. You've had pretty decent luck. Decent.
Not as well as I'd like to.
Well, And then Derek's got a couple on swarm traps, and John did his first swarm trap last year, and he got one. And then I think our masters, Roger, I see Roger laughing on there. His first year, he put up a couple traps. And how many did you end up catching? Like 7 your first year?
Yeah, I think I put up 10 traps and I caught 7 swarms.
Yeah, got him everywhere. So, and he's only a half mile from me, so he stole all my swarms. I'll put up some videos about swarm trapping. Like I said, I wanted to talk about the oxalic acid and the nosema. So I wanted to spend a little more time on that. So I kind of pared down the swarm trapping. And since next month we've got a guest speaker, I wanted to get into a little bit of hive splits. That's always a big question I get every year: is how do I split my hives? So we're just going to do some review on splitting hives. How close? I've had 6 of them sitting in my backyard, and I've caught a swarm in one of them. So they'll pick the one that they like if they're too close together. Yeah. So I like to space mine out. I usually try to put at least a half mile between them if I can, but mine are all over the county. I've got them everywhere from Mercerville to Bidwell. So, like I said, I've got places I can guarantee I'll put a swarm trap there and I'll catch bees every year. No, I'm not telling you where they're at. It's about like telling your favorite fishing hole. Just, oh, Jim wants me to just take him out and show. Okay. Well, yeah. So the show, yeah, yeah. You'll put a trap like. Yeah. And I try not to hang mine so that they can be seen from the road. 2 years ago, somebody hung one. What's the road going from Core Mill over to 141 where the mill used to be? Maple. Yeah. Huh? No, Maple Drive's up behind Speedway. Maple Grove or Maple Shade. Anyway, that road out there, I was going from one of Fred's yards to another one of Fred's yards. And I was driving out that road and looked up in a tree. It's like, there's somebody's swarm trap. I asked around to people I knew was keeping bees, and nobody knew whose it was. So somebody's got a swarm trap out there that they put up about every year, but I don't know whose it is. So, but I usually try to put mine somewhere where they're not going to be seen. Remember, these things, once you get bees in them, they're worth $150 to $200 because you got a hive of bees now. And I don't want somebody taking off of my bees. So they're usually not where somebody can see them unless it's the landowner and they know what they are. I've got landowners that call me up and say, hey, 5 minutes ago, bees moved in. I was like, okay, I'll be by tonight to get them. They watch them. They like watching them. They like seeing them come and go. So it also helps build your relationship with some of these landowners and maybe get permission to put beehives there in the future. So the other big question I always get in the spring is splits. So splits are a good way to replace your losses again without spending any money. Because after surviving the winter, the bee's natural inclination is to split itself via swarming and to make more beehives. So if we can control that impulse and we can take advantage of that impulse, we can make 2 or 3 or more hives out of one hive to replace either losses or to grow our apiary. And if a split fails, like if the queen fails last spring, I had several queens that didn't get mated because of the bad weathers, and I had them fail, and I just recombined them back with the parent hive. It wasn't that big of a deal. So splits are really, really simple. In May, I'll have bees out here at the church, and for our May meeting, we'll actually probably be doing some splits out here for our May meeting. So we'll do the 2 different types of splits. I'll make sure I've got 2 colonies out here that are ready to split. So the easiest type of split to do is called a walk-away split. This is the easiest to do. You don't need to find the queen. You just take your new hive and set it beside your old one, and you deal out the frames like a deck of cards. One for you, one for you, one for you, one for you. And you just split the frames up evenly between both hives. When I do a walk-away split, some people will checkerboard their frames by putting a frame of brood and an empty frame and a frame of brood and empty frame. I don't checkerboard my splits. I put all the frames together and then put my empty frames to the outside. But you're basically going to take a frame for this hive and a frame for that hive, and you're going to have two hives sitting side by side. Now, you can take the new hive to a different location, or you can leave them sitting side by side. It doesn't matter. It's your choice, dealer's choice on this one. If you leave them sitting side by side, because the foragers will be able to smell the queen, the hive that is queen right will end up with more foragers in it. So what I recommend doing, and what a lot of people recommend doing, is once a week for 3 weeks, is to take those two new hives, the new hive and the parent hive, and swap their positions on the hive stand every week for about 3 weeks. And that will get the hives balanced out as far as the number of bees in each of them. Otherwise, the queenless hive is going to end up with less bees than the queen right hive. And then this is my favorite way to split. This is the way that I do all of my splits. This is called a cut down split. The big difference is you have to find the queen. If you can't find the queen, you're not going to be able to do a cut down split. This kind of split gives you the best opportunity to make honey, and you can actually a lot of times make more honey than a queen right hive will. So you're going to find the frame with the queen, and you're going to place that frame with the queen on it in your new hive, and you're going to give her enough resources to continue to grow her population. I usually give them 1 to 2 frames of brood and 1 to 2 frames of stores. So now I've got the queen over here off to the side. I usually take her and move her a little bit away. Most of the time I leave her in the same yard, but I just shove her down a little bit. So the parent hive is queenless. If we go back to our bee math, after about 9 days, the bees are going to run out of brood to care for in about 9 days. So you're going to have all these bees in this hive with all this cat brood and no brood to take care of while they spend time raising a new queen. Remember, it takes 16 days from the time that you take that queen away for a new queen to hatch. It takes another 7 days for it to harden off, a couple days for it to mate. So you're looking at 4 weeks that you're going to have all these bees in this hive with nothing to do. So when they do that, they work their way up the caste system, and they go from nurse bees to foragers really, really quick. And you end up with a very, very large foraging force of bees. So this large foraging force of bees that has no brood to take care of, if you time this with the nectar flow, they can put on a lot of honey very, very, very quickly. In a matter of 3 weeks, you can get 40 to 60 pounds of honey out of one of these hives if you do this split right. This is like the 4th time. This is like the 4th time I've read this book. I'll bring it up on the screen here. Come on, computer. Let's see, stop sharing. Okay, so this book's called Honey on the Comb, or Honey in the Comb by Eugene Killian. He was one of the grandfathers of comb honey back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. Even his descendants still do large amounts of comb honey, but that's the kind of split that they recommend. They do a type of cut down split with their bees, and that's how they produce their honey crop every year, is by doing a cut down split. If you want to produce some honey and wanting to get into honey production, even if you don't want to do comb honey, this is a really good book to get started with, because it goes into a lot of detail on how to do these cut down splits to be able to get a good honey production out of your hive. They will raise a queen, and like I said, it takes 16 days for that queen to hatch, another 7 days for her to harden off, 2 or 3 days to mate. So you're looking at what, 23, 25, almost 30 days before she starts laying again, and there's nurse bees, or there's brood to take care of. Yeah, you got to get rid of the extra queen cells. I leave 2, yeah. You got to get rid of extra queen cells and usually leave 2. Yeah. but we'll do a cut down split in May. I'll do a demonstration of a cut down split, but I do a lot of cut down splits every year, and that's where the majority of my honey comes from, is making cut down splits. What I don't end up using for nucleus colonies and stuff like that. Huh? Okay, so when to do splits. The big thing with when to do splits is, yeah, hang on, let me get this. So when I do splits is I start looking for drones. So as soon as I see drone brood, cap drone brood in a beehive, if I go back to my beekeeping math, as soon as I see cap drone brood, I know that the drones will be out of the cells in 7 to 9 days. They'll hatch from those cells. Once those drones hatch from those cells, it takes them another week to harden off, and then they'll start mating in about 23, 24 days. So if I do a split, as soon as I see cap drone brood, I know that there's going to be a drone force available to mate my queen when she's ready to mate. Typically, we start seeing drone brood around here around the 1st of April. Talked to Fred the last several years. Fred always does his first splits the first week of April. Depending on the way that the weather's looking, of course, we can't see 3 to 4 weeks out when our queens are going to be getting mated. This year, if it stays wet like it's been, I'm probably going to wait till the 2nd week of April to do my splits. But usually the 1st, 2nd, 3rd week of April is when you want to start doing your splits, because by doing those splits, that's a type of swarm control. You can keep your hives from swarming for the most part by doing splits, because you're taking advantage of that instinct and using it to your advantage. When you take a portion of that population out and the queen, they think they've already swarmed and they just go on with life like they've already swarmed. So that's the advantage of doing a split is you can take that queen out of there and you can make that hive think that they've already swarmed and they just missed the party, and they'll just keep on going. So you're taking advantage of that inclination of the bees.
We'll probably start to see brood anytime.
There's already brood in your hives right now. There was brood when I checked in February, like February 2nd, 3rd, there was brood in hives in February. Small batches, they'll start raising small batches. Probably this week and next week, they're going to start really laying up and setting a lot of brood. If you open up a hive right now, you'll probably see 2 or 3 frames of brood in a hive right now. And she's probably, I would say, in the next week or so, going to start laying drones. If your hive is light, you need food on right now. Yeah, I recommend getting your emergency food on in February, because if you don't have it on in February, then they're going to run out. By now, they're already run. Like I saw several people post today that, oh, wait a minute, I just realized my hive starved and they're dead. Well, they didn't starve today. They starved 2 or 3 weeks ago. You just noticed they're dead today. You could probably start, the way the weather looks in the next week or so, you could probably start doing 1-to-1. You don't want to do 2-to-1 this time of year. 2-to-1's too thick for them. There's too much sugar, and it will take them too long to process it. You want to give them 1-to-1 because they want to be able to process that syrup and give it directly to brood. They don't want to turn it into honey. They don't want to dry it down. They're going to use that to feed brood.
You say we could start giving a 1-to-1 there next week, Chris?
As soon as the temperatures are consistently above 50 degrees, you can start giving 1-to-1 sugar syrup.
Okay.
Yeah, mine are still working the solid sugar right now. I checked them the other day.
Yeah, they'll still work
Yeah.
the solid
Mine
sugar.
just started on the solid sugar.
I checked my hives last week. I had 4 of them.
Mm-hmm.
3 of them, and they all had plenty of honey.
Mm-hmm.
3 of them, the bees were gone.
Yeah.
They weren't dead in the hive.
Yeah.
So what does that suggest?
that usually suggests mites. That's usually a mite issue or a queen failure, one or the other. Those are the two reasons that they'll leave. If the queen fails, and during wintertime, a lot of times the bees will realize that they're absolutely queenless, they're hopelessly queenless, and they'll realize that there's a hive next door, and they'll just move in with their neighbors. Mhm. And then the other reason is mites. The mite pressure will be too high, but that usually happens. You usually see that in November, December is when they abscond from mites because the mite pressure is too high and they leave in those November, December because of the mites. If you find them this time of year, like if you've been checking them once a month or whenever you can through the winter, and this time of year, like they were there a month ago, but now they're gone. Usually what's happened is the queen's died and they've gone over to the neighbors and moved in with the neighbor.
Now, should we condense the hive right now? Get rid of the empty, brood, comb that they've eaten and just leave them?
Okay, the question for those online is should we condense our hives right now? The thing you have to remember is it's still really, really cold out. So those combs are really, really bitter or brittle. So the more you move those combs around by breaking that hive down, the more likely you are to damage that comb that they've worked so hard for. If you take a box of comb right now that's been outside and with no bees in it, and the bees haven't been on that comb to keep it warm, and you drop it on the ground, that comb is going to shatter like glass. I think that it's better to, because there's no risk of wax moths or hive beetles right now. I think you're better off to leave that on there and not risk damaging it. And then in another 2 or 3 weeks when it's warmer, then you can pull it off. But for right now, I would leave that on there till about the 1st of April. And just let that go because it's really, really easy to damage those combs when it's this cool still. Ask me how I know. I dropped a box of comb the other day and it shattered and went everywhere. So it is what it is. I pulled it in solar wax melter and yeah, I'll sell it to somebody that wants wax or something. Yes.
So you're talking about switching from dry sugar
To sugar syrup.
to sugar syrup?
Yes.
Are we still talking about feeding inside the hive?
Yes.
Or setting one out?
I don't like to open feed. The reason is with open feeding, not only you're feeding your bees, you're feeding your neighbor's bees. So I like to feed inside of the hive. That's just my personal preference. I know some people open feed pollen substitute, and I know some people use open feeders out in their bee yard. Roger would probably like it if I open fed because Roger's bees would come over and visit and they'd get a free meal. But that's the biggest reason I don't open feed is because you're not only feeding your bees, but you're feeding the wasps, the yellow jackets, especially in the summertime. This time of year, the problem with open feeding is there's nothing to keep that sugar syrup warm at night. If you're taking that sugar syrup in every night and keeping it warm, because if that sugar syrup drops below 50 or 55 degrees, and the bees won't take it because it'll chill them too much, and they'll take it and then they won't be able to fly. So if that sugar syrup is right on top of the frames inside of the hive, that heat that's going up through the hive is going to keep that sugar syrup warm, even when it gets down into the 30s at night. If it's still getting down into the 20s, I don't think they'll be able to keep that sugar syrup warm. But if it's still in the 30s and 40s at night, they'll be able to keep that warm enough that they'll be able to take it during the day.
I've never open fed either, but I have read multiple places it can create a robbing problem too.
Yeah, you're not going to have robbing that much this time of year. In the fall, it'll create a huge robbing problem. But this time of year, I've never had issues with robbing. I've got dead hives sitting in my bee yard with 100 pounds of honey in them that I haven't messed with yet, and they're not bothering it. So it's still too early for robbing, but I figure in another week or two, you can start feeding 1-to-1 sugar syrup, no problems. And the thing of it is once you start feeding 1-to-1 sugar syrup, get your dry sugar off because once they see that sugar syrup, they're going to take that dry sugar out as trash. Take that hardened dry sugar out, put it in a 5-gallon bucket with a sealable lid, seal it up, and use it for next year. I use that. I had a 5-gallon bucket left over from last year. I threw a couple big chunks on a couple of hives. So, any other management questions?
What temperature when you're going in your hive, to reallocate, condense?
I would like it to be sunny and at least in the 50s. I would rather it be warm and sunny than it be 60 and cloudy. Does that make sense?
How about temperature at night?
The biggest thing is if I'm going to manipulate them, I want to manipulate them earlier in the day so that they have time at night to reorganize. I don't think that that's a big a deal, but I want to do it early enough in the day that they have the rest of the day to reorganize and recluster if they need to. If I'm going to disturb them, I don't think that that's. I mean, I don't think we might have a couple more days in the 20s. I think we've got a couple days in the 20s coming up. I don't think we're going to see any more days in the single digits. I think we're beyond that. I could be wrong. You're gonna put syrup on Wednesday?
Yeah, but I'm gonna put a little pro health in it, and that'll keep it from, that's not gonna ferment this time of year. So.
No, it's not gonna ferment this time of year.
Don't put the announcer's jinx on us. Remember last Mother's Day?
Yeah, no, yeah. Yeah, that's what I was sitting there thinking about in the back of my head is last Mother's Day. So, but yeah, if you think that you need to feed dry sugar probably for another week or so, and then you can switch over to 1-to-1 sugar syrup. I figure, like I said, I figure the silver maples will be out in full bloom probably in week and a half. Then they'll get their pollen. The maple sap is starting to get a little bit cloudy, which means that the bloom is not too far away. So let's see, share my screen. So 1-to-1 sugar syrup is 1 pound of sugar to 1 pound of water. So the way that I do it is water weighs 8 pounds to a gallon. So I mix a gallon of water with a 10-pound bag of sugar syrup. That's close enough to 1-to-1 for me. Or if you want to be super precise, you can get 2 4-pound bags at Walmart and do 1 gallon of water. That's the easiest way to do 1-to-1. 8 pounds in 1 gallon. Because remember, water weighs 8 pounds a gallon. You want to do it based off of weight because with volume, if you put a cup of sugar to a cup of water, that's not 1-to-1. A cup of sugar, because of its airspace and all that stuff from the crystals, it isn't quite the same weight as a cup of water. So
I've read both ways. Some say you should never put boiling water in it. Some say you should.
Boiling water, 1-to-1, you should not have to heat to be able to get all the sugar to dissolve. Very rarely, I never have to heat 1-to-1, but I will heat up 2-to-1 just enough to get it to dissolve. I don't ever bring it to boiling.
I just heat enough to dissolve all
Yeah.
the sugar in 5-gallon bucket.
That's all I do. Yeah.
Say you do them all most people do a quart.
Mm-hmm.
You're just mixing up 1 quart.
Yeah.
So a cup of sugar to a quart of water.
A quart would be 2 pounds. I would do 2 pounds to a quart of water.
So if you got a 4-pound bag of sugar, you could make 2 quarts of sugar syrup.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. About half a gallon. Yeah. I mix mine up. The tightwad in me, I save the milk jugs, rinse them out, clean them real good, and I mix mine up and I fill them up in plastic milk jugs, and I tote plastic milk jugs around. There's guys that use the water cans that look like gas cans, the blue ones you get at Walmart that are 5 gallons, and they'll mix up 5 gallons at a time, and they'll take those to the bee yard. There's people mix it up in 5-gallon buckets. To me, pouring it out of a 5-gallon bucket to put it in a feeder or a Ziploc baggie is, I slop it everywhere, including on myself. So it's easier for me to mix it up and then put it in something that I can pour out of, like a gallon jug, or like if I was going to do a lot of it, then I would use one of those 5-gallon, like a gas can looking thing that they sell in the camping stuff for Walmart. They make those 5-gallon water cans that are food grade and specifically for water for camping. So.
This is a nice time of year with your sugar syrup, but you can make it in bulk and leave it outside.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to worry about it going bad.
No.
So say you was mixing up 5 gallons,
Set it outside.
you got 5 gallons of water, what's gonna happen when you dump 8 pounds of sugar?
It's going to go up, but it'll absorb it. It's not going to go up as much as you think.
It should go up and flow.
No, I mix it up in a 5-gallon bucket all the time. 10 pounds of sugar in an 8-gallon bucket with 5 gallons of water. I don't fill it all the way to 5 gallons. I'll fill it up about 3/4 of the way, put my sugar in, mix it up, and then fill it up the rest of the way and finish mixing it up. Just top it off to 5 gallons. Yeah. It doesn't have to be exact. It's not rocket science. We're feeding bees. Yeah. They're not out there with their hydrometer and. Yeah. You just don't want it thick. You want a thin syrup this time of year because they're going to feed it directly to the brood. Remember, the honey in your hive, they're going to have to warm that up, and they're going to have to add moisture to it in order to feed it to the brood. Because when nectar is on and they're feeding brood, they're feeding it almost straight nectar. So they're going to have to warm that up, add water to it, and then feed it. So they're going to use the 1-to-1 to feed the brood, which is what you want. You want them to feed the brood. Easy on them as possible.
Do not feed Pro Sweet right now.
Which one's Pro Sweet?
Pro Sweet is Man Lake's pre-mixed sugar syrup.
Okay.
It's an excellent winter feed. It has both sugars in it.
Okay.
But it's 2-to-1. It would be equivalent
Okay.
to 2-to-1.
Okay.
But I've seen a lot of people, they sell that stuff year round.
Yeah.
And it's not advertised as being for wintertime only.
So Corey's saying don't feed the Pro Sweet this time of year because it's a winter feed and not a spring and summer's feed because it's a 2-to-1. Okay. So that's about all I've got. I'll post, like I said, I'll send out some videos on swarm trapping, and then in May when we're here doing splits, or May when we're here for the bee yard, we'll do some splits. So just some things coming up. April 5th, 6:30 here at Fellowship of Faith. Via Zoom, we're going to have Dr. Hongmai Lee Barley from Central State Community College, or Central State University. Central State is a land grant university, and she is the lead bee researcher at Central State. And she's going to be talking about feral bees and their importance to our ecosystem and some of the research that she's done on feral bees and local bees compared to bees that are brought in from out of state. May 3rd, we'll be here, but we'll be out in the bee yard, so bring your bee suit. And June 7th will be a regular meeting, but I haven't decided on a topic on that. So if you've got an idea for a topic, send me a link for a topic, or send me an idea for a topic, and I'll see what I can develop.
Are you going to set up a bee yard?
I'm going to set up a bee yard out here. I talked to Jamie, and I'm going to work with Fred Winters, and we're going to set up probably 8 or 10 hives out here for us to be able to do some stuff with, do some education and stuff like that. So that's the plan. So the other thing is, if you're interested in doing a plot of buckwheat, I'll be ordering the buckwheat seed probably the next week or so. I'm going to be ordering. I've got a couple half-acre plots I'm going to be doing this year for my bees. If you plant your buckwheat the first week of June, it's going to bloom the second week of July, which is right when our dearth is hitting. So it's a good way to feed your bees. I think with packaging and everything else, I think it's going to be about $4 a pound for buckwheat seed, and a pound should do a pretty decent sized plot. It's 50 pounds an acre, so it should do a pretty good sized flower bed if you want to put some buckwheat out. So.
If you're looking for clover this year, white clover,
Mm-hmm.
Yoggers has got it over Point Pleasant.
Yoggers has white clover?
Yes.
Okay.
I checked into it, and I think it was $2 something a pound.
Okay.
2.5, and online it's anywhere from 4.5 to
Yeah.
sky limit.
Yeah. And then in the fall, I'm looking at ordering in hairy vetch. Hairy vetch is it's a ground cover, but it's for overwintering. You would plant it in October, and it would bloom in May as a food for the bees, and it's a very, very good source of nectar for the bees. So I'm looking at maybe bringing in a bulk order of hairy vetch. So if I decide to do that, I'll let everybody know so you guys can get on it. It's super expensive compared to buckwheat. It's really expensive.
Pretty good luck with
Crimson clover.
on that. Very good.
Okay.
It's about New York. It's about
Yeah, it's a pretty short clover. Yeah, yeah. I do a lot of white clover, like in my garden and stuff like that. I'll plant white clover around because it fixes nitrogen and helps your plants grow. So it keeps the weeds down too. So I'll throw a bunch of white clover in my garden. It is. Yep. I heard it makes good pancakes too. Good deer feed.
That vetch is excellent if you have any steep area
Mm-hmm.
where you don't want to mow or you don't
Yeah.
want to mow. That'll grow.
Yeah. And you have to be careful with the vetch because there's several different kinds of vetch. The most popular vetch for cover crop for the no-till soybeans, corn, and all that stuff is crown vetch. And crown vetch has no nutrition for bees. There's no nectar. There's no honey in crown vetch for the bees. Hairy vetch is the only one that's really got any nutrition in it for the bees, and it's actually got a pretty decent amount. So it does make a good cover for supplementing the bees. So I'm looking at getting some in the fall, but like I said, it's kind of pricey. It'll be probably in the $8 to $10 a pound range is where it's going to land. So that's crown vetch. Mhm. Yeah, yeah, it's not any good for the bees.
Yeah, you wonder why would they not, this off topic, why would the state not put out a pollinator vetch?
Because the crown vetch has a better, deeper root system, and it holds the soil better, and it also fixes more nitrogen than the hairy vetch. And it's cheaper. It's a lot cheaper. The crown vetch, I think it was like $1 or $2 a pound, whereas the hairy vetch was like $8 to $10 a pound. So, but the farmers like it because it does fix more nitrogen and does do better for the soil than what the hairy vetch does. So that's why the farmers like it. So, okay, that's all I've got. Anybody got any questions or anything?
Where do you want to put out your traps for your yellow jackets? Clean, safe to catch.
I've never had any issues with yellow jackets. That's not to say that I won't in the near future, but they say to put those out late April, early May. If you watch that phenology calendar, it will say it has a thing on there when the yellow jacket queens will be hatching. If you watch the phenology stuff.
I seem to catch a lot of wax moths.
I've never.
Which I'm next to the river.
Yeah.
The locust's gonna be the 17-year ones.
Supposedly the 17-year locust will be out, but they won't bother the bees any.
There won't be any.
No.
You know, year before last, I had a big yellow jacket problem down here, but I put out some yellow jacket traps, and this past year I didn't have any problem at all with yellow jackets around my hives.
Yeah, I haven't had any problems with yellow jackets. What I've heard with the yellow jackets is if you can get traps out in early spring when the queens are just coming out of hibernation, is they need a lot of meat. So you can make a trap with a board. You staple some bacon to a board and put it over like a 13x9 pan filled with water and dish soap, and they'll get on that bacon upside down. They'll eat that bacon. They'll get heavy. They'll fall off into the water and drown. I've heard of a lot of beekeepers using that to be able to trap the yellow jackets because it doesn't attract their honeybees. Because a lot of the sweet yellow jacket lures will lure in your honeybees, and the honeybees aren't attracted to the meat. So the yellow jackets are attracted to the bacon because that's the kind of protein that they use, and they'll eat that bacon. They'll get engorged and they'll fall off into that water where they're hanging upside down and they'll drown. So I've never noticed any problems with yellow jackets. On bacon. Everybody loves bacon. Yeah, you got to get the cheap bacon. You don't want to waste good bacon. Maybe that's a good use for that turkey bacon or. Okay. Well, if nobody else has anything, I appreciate everybody showing up this evening in person and on Zoom. Next month, we'll be here in person. If you want to come out in person, then also we'll broadcast via Zoom like we did this time. but we'll have Dr. Barley from Central State University giving us a talk about feral bees and local bees. So I appreciate everybody. Have a good week.
Okay.
Thank you, Chris.